Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight I want to welcome Cheryl Costa. She is a two-service military veteran, a retired aerospace security engineer, and a published playwright. She has had a lifelong interest in UFOs. From 1998 to 2001, she hosted the X Factor talk radio program in Washington, D.C., covering UFOs and many other paranormal topics. In 2013, she began writing New York Skies, a weekly newspaper weblog for SyracuseNewsTimes.com. In the column, she shares lively accounts of New York State UFO sightings. Cheryl, welcome. How are you doing tonight?
Not bad, Chris. It's a typical winter evening here in Syracuse, New York. We took about 6 inches of lake effect snow today.
Oh, wow. What's the temp out there?
The last I looked at was like about 22, something like that.
Oh, wow. We're not that far behind. We're in the 40s right now down in South Louisiana here.
Ooh.
Yeah, not that far behind.
Well,
But,
Syracuse pulls somewhere on the order of 150 to 170 inches of snow a year. We win what we call the Snowball Award. There is an official award called the Snowball Award, and there's 4 or 5 upstate New York cities that are in the running typically, and Syracuse wins rather regularly.
oh, wow. Very impressive.
It snows every day here.
Wow. Well, looking forward to tonight. We're going to talk UFOs, UFO statistics, your thoughts on disclosure, where disclosure is going in the future, and any rabbit holes that we can follow during our conversation. But first, let's hear a little bit more about yourself. Let's hear about your background and what brought you to this topic and this research.
Well, the short story is I had my first sighting when I was about 12. And then with my parents, and my mother pointed it out. It was a big silver ball parked out there in the sky. And give you a perspective how big it was. If you hold your arm out, look at your little fingernail. That's about how big it was. And it was in a clear blue sky, and it just sat there like a rock. And we talked about it for 15 or 20 minutes, and I was about 12. And we got back on the road, went down, got on the state road. And I crawled up in the back of that big old Chevy Impala, had big back window. And I just sat there watching this thing as we drove home and on a highway. And I kept saying to myself, who are you guys? Who are you guys? And when that thing decided to go, it was like you see with the modern movies with, starships, gone, and it changed me. And my mom and I started getting books out of the library and sharing them with each other, kind of like little mini book reports between the two of us. And you got to remember, 12, 13, 14 years old, mom and dad are stupid, So
Yeah, right.
This was kind of one of the few things that we bonded on. When Von Daniken's book came out in the mid to late 60s, our copy in our household, mom dog-eared on the top pages, I dog-eared on the bottom pages. It was just the book physically got wrecked. But I guess my second sighting was when I was in the Air Force, Christmas Eve 1970 in Cam Bay, Vietnam. And I was walking at about 11:30 at night with a fellow airman. And we were walking down to the base chapel to go to midnight mass for something to do. And we saw something streaking across, where we were in central part of the country. It was a gazillion stars in the sky kind of night, And we saw something streaking across the sky, and we both, it's a jet, and then it stopped. And my friend said, well, wait a minute, jets don't stop like that, and helicopters don't fly that fast. And now I said, I'd been well read at that point, and I said, oh, if this thing is what I think it is, it might start dancing around like a fairy, and darn if it didn't start darting around up there and then gone. And neither one of us had our mind on midnight mass when we got to the chapel.
Wow.
But I never told anybody that until about 15 years ago. I was like everybody else, even though I was well read through my life. I the words, I guess, come a little hard, but basically, I was like everybody else. We were kind of conditioned: don't tell anybody; they'll think you're crazy.
Right. Yeah.
As a friend of mine once said, we were joking about, seeing a UFO. Hey, did you see that? No, and you didn't either. That kind of thing. And so we were pretty much victims of the same thing. The other point was my mom was very into it in the late 60s. And she got one of these, I remember a mimeograph letter coming in the mail. And it was from some people in Ohio, and they were forming this thing called the Mutual UFO Network. Okay, and it's like 68, 69 time frame. And well, when I went in the Air Force, I couldn't join any kind of a group like that. It was a hindrance to a security clearance, And I was in the military and the military industrial complex for almost 40 years, close to almost 10 years between Air Force and Navy for me. And then I went out of the Navy and was immediately picked up by different defense contractors. Okay. And until I retired in 2011 from Lockheed Martin, 32 years with them. For 40 years, I was under like the pressure of a security clearance, and things like UFO clubs and things like that were a no-no. So.
Wow, very interesting. Now, going back to your sightings, I personally have never had a UFO sighting. I've always wanted to see one. I'm hoping to see one. I've got a trip to Nevada coming up for a UFO conference, and they're going to have a couple of night watches. I'm hoping to see something out there for the first time ever. I do this show, and I talk to all kinds of researchers and experiencers, and, it's funny that I've never seen one, but of course I believe it. And it's fascinating. Do you think that certain people are more prone to having these sightings than others?
Yes. There are some people who see them rather regularly. There are plenty of people out there who misidentify things. Okay, we know this. I know plenty of MUFON investigators. In my case, I came out in 2012 timeframe. I was working for a newspaper in the technical department, and I started reading. One night I saw an article. It was November 5th, 2012. I saw an article on CNN.com online. There was a little sidebar story. It said UFOs have been declining since the 1980s. Maybe they were always just an urban legend. And I said, that sounds like misinformation. And so I went out to the National UFO Reporting Center for the first time in my life, and I dug down into the site. I found some summaries buried down in there, and I added them up. I put them on a little spreadsheet, and the graph went up like a rocket to the right. I said, wow, what memo didn't the UFOs get? They're not declining. In fact, they were increasing. So for some people to see these things, many more people. Okay, let me put it this way: many more people see these things than report them. I worked. I've been doing statistics on UFOs since I started doing my newspaper column back in 2013. Now the newspaper went out of business here in June of 2019. 26th of June, we closed the doors. But I wrote for them for 7 years and did 236 articles about UFOs. And one of the last couple that I did was I had tracked a metric, and let me explain. I can look up, I can go to MUFON and they can give me numbers, and I can go to the National UFO Reporting Center and they got data, and I can put all that into a spreadsheet, and I can tell you how many people reported a UFO. And that's what our book was, and our UFO Sightings desk reference book came out in 2017. That was what people reported. Okay. But in 2017, there was this Fox Picture Home Entertainment, Fox Pictures poll because they were releasing a movie about the Phoenix Lights, and this story was, 3 teenagers didn't come home after the Phoenix Lights, kind of an abduction horror story kind of thing. But they sponsored a national poll on some things, and most of it had to do with abductions, but there were questions in there about UFO sightings, and basically it worked out to 16% of Americans say they've seen a UFO. Well, most of that's probably very modern, probably in the last 20 or 30 years. So I kept an eyeball on that polling metric. I couldn't confirm it because only one poll had ever been done like this that I could find. And then about 6 months ago, actually last September, the Gallup poll organization had done one. Of course, 2019, we've had an awful lot of news and television stories about UFOs. And they came out with a poll. And again, it said like 16% of Americans say they've seen a UFO. Well, that translates to 1 in 5. Now, you go to a UFO convention. Up until recently, if you went to a UFO convention, people would say, 1 in 10 people see a UFO. And that number doesn't work out with the sighting reports. And then we'd also see situations where people say, they came back to me and said, well, Cheryl, you got to understand 1 in 10 people sees them and 1 in 10 people reports them. Another layer of that. And when I did the numbers on that, it was some very huge number that couldn't possibly be real. Okay. But when this poll came out and the polling data came out, we came up with 1 in 6 Americans has said they've seen a UFO. Now that's even better than 1 in 10, isn't it? And
Yeah.
it works out to about 45 million people. Now you crank those numbers back and work them back into the actual sighting reports. And you do it by state. You look up the population for each state. You take the adult population, which is like 76%, and you get a number. And then this is done in a spreadsheet. And then you take that 16% against that, and you get some number for each state, and you added them all what that percentage would be of 1 in 10, some amount of people, of how many people report. So it came out to an average, a rough title. If somebody said to me, well, how many people report a UFO? I said about 1 in 300. The actual number actually works out to about 1 in 277. Okay. Now you take that 277 back and multiply it back against all of the UFO sightings, we'll say for the last 18 years or the last 20 years. And you get a very and it's
you froze up for a second there.
Okay, I'm sorry. It might be a bandwidth issue. Are you there?
Yeah, you're fine now.
Okay. Well, the problem is that you get a very interesting number, and the number comes up very, very big, and it's how many people saw a UFO. Well, we're talking 53 million people here. Okay, is what we're talking about. And then when you break it down by state, and it's a very different number than what people report. And so let's say the numbers out there around, I think the best number I can give you right now is about 45 million people have seen a UFO in the United States, and probably in the last 20 years.
No, well, that brings me to, would there be certain areas that are getting more sightings than others?
Well, okay. The top 10 states report 52% of the sightings for the country. Okay. I'll tell you momentarily, if you give me a moment here, I will tell you exactly what the top 10 states are. And I have to open up my own book and look at it because off the top of my head, I don't remember.
No problem at all.
It's okay. Here we go. Okay, the top state is California. Well, everybody knee-jerks. First thing I got to tell you, everybody knee-jerks. Well, they got this 40 million population, or 39 million and change. And population isn't, when we wrote our book, we discovered that population isn't the only driver. Okay. And we discovered that it's population, temperate weather, uh, hours of darkness. I'm sorry. Let me say that again. Population, temperate weather, and I just drew a blank. It's late.
Oh, no worries at all.
But basically, there's four elements, and it'll come back to me in a moment. But one of them is hours of darkness. But the bottom line was California was the number one state. Okay. Florida follows. Texas follows that as number 3. Okay. Now, after that, they have been solidly there since like 2004 or 5. They've stabilized there. But the positions from 4 to 10 move around. Okay, different years, different states are number 4, number 5. Like when we wrote the book, New York State was like number 6. Currently, a year or two ago, it was number 4. Currently, it's number 5. Okay, Arizona, amazingly enough, has consistently been number 7 for the past 6 or 7 years. So it does vary. So California, if you want to just go on pure raw sightings, California is the number 1 place. But again, remember I said people say, oh, well, they knee jerk and say, oh, it's population. And Florida and Texas have almost the same amount of sightings. We're talking 2000, and for the book, I'm looking at the book from 2001 to 2015. And they have almost the same amount of sightings. The numbers were in the mid 7,000s, but Florida has half the population of Texas. Okay, and we have other examples where, like Washington State and we'll say Pennsylvania had very similar numbers. Okay, and one had half the population of the other. That kind of thing. So population wasn't always the driver. We found that temperate weather was one of the major drivers. And that's a very, very, very strong thing, because we noticed it was seasonal. Sightings have the quantity of sighting reports are seasonal. You get up in the northern states, it peaks in like July, August, September time frame, the warmer months. The rest of the year it falls off, and it's quiescent from like October, November, December, January, February, March, and April, and then starts to tick up in May, and then June goes up a little bit, and then July and August go through the roof if it's a northern state. It's latitude driven. So if you get down to like the middle level states going across the country from, say, Maryland, Virginia, that type of thing, and go across the country, that peak in the middle of July and August starts to come down. It's really weird. In fact, when we first did a chart of UFOs in a particular state by month, do it by month, and the New York State researchers that we knew looked at it and said, "Oh, that's a dumb chart, UFOs by month." And what we found out, we were almost not going to put it in the book, but what we found out, and Linda discovered this, she was putting the book together. I hadn't really noticed it, but when she was putting the book together, she said, "Did you notice there's a latitude difference with the monthly sightings?" And she said, "What?" And she said, the northern states were peaking in June, July, August time frame. Usually July and August are through the roof. And you get down to middle level states, that middle of the year peak starts coming down and leveling out with the other numbers. And then you get down to the deep south, it's a statistically flat picket fence. And actually in the warmer states like Texas and Florida and Arizona, it actually falls off a little bit in the summertime because it's too hot to be outside. So these are little things we discovered. But as we said, the top 10 states, let me give you those: California, Florida, Texas, Washington State, Pennsylvania, New York, Arizona, Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio. And if you want to count the 11th, North Carolina sits right around 11 and 12 most of the time.
Now, when you're talking about the percentage of sightings, how can we compare this to I guess, the amount of abductions that are occurring coinciding with these sightings? Do we have any way to, to, I guess, measure that?
Well, no, actually, because nobody's keeping a database on abductions. It's such a personal thing. I actually had somebody, actually, I've had several people come to me. Steve Bassett from the Paradigm Research Organization reached out to me at one point. He says, God, Cheryl, if you and Linda could do a book like that for the experiencers, that would be fantastic. It would blow the
Right.
lid off this whole UFO thing, public relations wise. But I said to him, I said, where am I going to get a database? MUFON doesn't collect this stuff, actually. They really don't. They're only now doing it. Kathleen Martin's sort of doing that in MUFON, but their database doesn't show that stuff. It's considered very private information, so it's hard to get the statistics. I agree with him. Now, I'll tell you one thing I did try to do. I tried to reach out to Whitley Strieber. He's a very hard man to contact.
He is, I can agree, because I've been trying to contact him as well.
I've been trying as a newspaper reporter for 3-4 years. I finally got him to talk to me on Facebook, and we've had a couple of very, very light cursory conversations. But when I told him I'd like to interview him for my column, he said, send me your list of questions. And I don't interview that way. I usually just try to have a conversation with somebody, kind of like we're doing here. And that was unacceptable to him. He didn't want to get cornered and anything like that. And I said, okay, fine, I respect that. And we let it go at that. But one of the things I wanted to ask him, and again, maybe at one of these UFO conferences that we're both speakers, maybe I'll actually get to sit him down over a cup of coffee or a drink and say, would you be willing to share? I'll do a non-disclosure, or whatever. Would you be willing to share those 10 or 12,000 letters that your wife got from during the time of your books being like communion and all that, so I can get some statistics, of what states. I won't reveal anybody's name. I just want to get the statistics, and that's what I'm going to pitch to them at some point. But we really don't have a, government wise, it should be the Census Department or the Department of Health that should be gathering this UFO data, and it should be they should be also giving an anonymous database for experiencers, but they don't. Nobody does. It's all, people have been putting this out. It's all in their head, and they're crazy people and things like this. But, Bud Hopkins didn't think so, and John Mack didn't think so, and those guys suffered. I mean, they got laughed at a lot by people, by colleagues in their careers. So we're still overcoming this stigma, when my newspaper went under, I thought, we had the New York Times did that big story. Well, just 2017 actually was kind of our year of disclosure. Okay. In January 2017, we had the Obama era kind of disclosure. It was a very weak disclosure. It was the CIA put up a whole bunch of declassified Kissinger documents back from the Nixon era, that type of thing, mostly about 10, 12,000 million cables or something like this. But there was also some UFO stuff in there. And the goofy thing was, it was from the CIA and the OSI of the CIA, Office of Special Investigation of Central Intelligence Agency. And of course, for years, the CIA said, oh, we don't study UFOs. That's silly. And baloney, they didn't. Okay, they did.
Yeah.
And I have the PDFs of some of these OSI PhDs back in the late 40s and early 50s saying, hey, wow, did you notice there's more sightings in the summertime? Geez, there's something called, maybe there's summer madness or something, and literally I was reading papers like this. And of course, we figured out what it really was with a bigger sample, but it's goofy. And so that was that one. And then our book came out in March, and the New York Times took it very seriously. The reporter who did our piece, Ralph Blumenthal, went into his editors and said, I know why we don't report UFOs. He threw our 2.5-pound book on the desk, and it's numbers, charts, graphs. It's scientific qualitative data, and that got their attention. They did a big piece on us, and your audience can Google it. NYT, New York Times, UFO Costa, and what you'll get is an April 24th, 2017 article in the New York Times that talks about our book of statistics. 6, 7, 8 months later, December 16th, Ralph Blumenthal with Leslie Keene, and I can't remember the guy from Political, broke the story that the Pentagon was doing it. And of course, then we got Lou Elizondo involved and all that kind of stuff. But 2017 was probably the watershed year for what I'm going to call disclosure. Now, we've had a lot of stuff since then, but have you noticed, have you been following the papers? The Pentagon's been trying to backpedal that. They've been trying to throw Lou Elizondo under the bus, and they've been trying to we don't really study UFOs, and
Right.
this is lately, and so I don't know if we're going to go back into another dark age here. There's this backpedaling, and to add to that, there are some people who are really trying to shut people like me up. I've been leaned on very strongly, and when I published some of the last things I published, I pissed somebody off because I've been leaned on significantly, and that's why I've kind of reduced my profile a bit in the last couple of months.
Oh, wow. So have you been, I guess, threatened in any way?
Let's say it this way: I'm a retired computer security engineer, and our home system used to average maybe 5, 10 malware or virus attacks a day. Okay, it averages out to about 150, 300 a month. Okay, that's the background noise. That's just what's always out there. Okay, that's the traffic going by every day. Okay. In October, just about the same time I put out those numbers about how big our sightings are in the United States, like up in the 4,200, up in the 50 million number. And I actually broke it down by states. I actually plotted up. I put a chart out on Facebook that had the numbers, not the numbers what are reported and what we think they were, and the numbers like in California were in the 4 or 5 million range kind of thing. And suddenly, my computer system had over 5,700 virus and malware attacks.
Oh, wow.
And one, I'm sorry, not every protective measure works. I mean, I have my system pretty hardened. Something got through, and it was very insidious. It did a software thing where it reached into my software on my laptop and turned off the software, turned off the software control for my the fan in the laptop. And I wasn't there by the computer at the time. I was, out doing something in my car in the parking lot, and my laptop literally fried. It burned up because the fan had been shut off and the motherboard cooked.
Oh, man.
Okay, this is back in October, and it cost me 2 weeks. Besides, even though I wasn't writing UFO articles at that time for major publication, I had a few places on the internet that I could a couple of online blogs that invited me to publish with them for a time until I got back with another newspaper. And I was off the air for almost 2 weeks between getting a new machine, getting it re-outfitted with software, and all of that. I did not lose the UFO database because I have the major copy of the database in a hardened site, so I did not lose that, but I lost a considerable amount of other stuff. And I'm not the only one that's being attacked right now. There's a group here in New York, a research group here in New York State that has come under a huge amount of attack, and this everything from property damage to people spreading lies about the membership, things like this. I mean, very stuff where people almost got arrested because of what was being said about them. So somebody really is trying to shut a lot of us up.
Oh, very interesting.
And it's not a lot of people know this, but I fell off the grid here after my computer burned up. I fell off the grid. I'm only doing a few radio shows right now, and I've told a lot of people on Facebook the other day I may never come back to the UFO community. And they said, "What about all your data?" And he says, "You know something? If I make a final decision about this, I might hit the erase key on the way out."
You feel you feel that threatened to where, it makes you want to lessen doing your radio shows?
I don't. My radio shows are not on UFOs. I do a mystical show.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But it's making you want to stop doing your UFO research, is what you're saying.
Well, there's two things. One, I was getting very sick of it because you wouldn't believe how many people, when the book came out, you wouldn't believe how much, I don't want to call it hate mail, but hate mail is about the only thing that works, that I got that said, "Oh, I bought their book. It's just a book full of numbers and charts." Okay. And they wanted to know they wanted the case studies. They wanted all that stuff. Okay. And that's what this book was not. This is a different form of research. And everybody's been conditioned, since groups like MUFON and other kinds of research groups have been around, that the only way you can do UFO research is to tramp around in Mrs. Murphy's barnyard looking for evidence of that thing that might have landed there. Okay. The field studies. Okay. They think that case studies are the only way to do research, and that's not always true. And Linda and I were the first two to come along and do a statistical study. And we got away from the 20th century and said, "Hey, let's do a nice clean study of the 21st century data." Okay. We needed a niche. The other problem we ran into were a couple of women researchers, and gay women researchers at that. And you wouldn't believe how much crap we've taken. We've had people at UFO shows pound on our desk at the dealer suite. Okay, I'll have a copy of the book out there, and I'll flip through it. Some guy will flip through it and then start pounding on the thing and say, "Did you have a man check this?"
Oh my.
Okay. I have had people corner, you're at a hotel for one of these conventions, and you step off in these little alcoves to get a drink of water, that are in the hallways. I've had people corner me in there and threaten me. Okay. And I've been putting up with this crap now for the last 7 years. And it got me to a point where I just needed a good excuse to walk away from it all.
Yeah, that's terrible that it had to come to that for you.
Say that again.
I said it's terrible that it had to come to that for you.
Well, it's funny because I'm not going to point fingers at specific individuals or anything like this, but we have a problem with the UFO community, and I'm doing this from the minority side of this thing. Okay, when I worked in Lockheed Martin, I was one of maybe 16 trans persons in the corporation. Okay, and I had the diversity department come to me and say, "Can you help us start like a gay group, or in the company for diversity and inclusion, as they call it?" And I worked with them. I did. And I started this back around 2000 time frame, and we turned it into. It started with about it was me and one other woman that signed up to be the point people, and over a period of about 7 years, we managed to turn it into the premier employee resource group within the company. Nationally recognized 2 years after I retired. It was nationally recognized to be the best one in the country for LGBTQ type of things. So one of the things, first thing, okay, let's go back to this. I'm not bellyaching. If you watch the Cosmos series, that the second series that was done by the the black astronomer, I can't remember his name. They made a very big point about the fact that a lot of women made a lot of really serious discoveries in astronomy, but some old white guy took credit for it. Okay.
Right.
There's a proven track record on that stuff. Okay. And people like Vera Rubin, who discovered that the galaxies are flying apart at astronomical speeds and accelerating. She discovered this. She went out to study something. In fact, she made a comment. If you want to know where your niche is in astronomy, you go walk into an astronomy convention and say you're studying something. And if everybody laughs, you know you got a niche to study. Okay. And even the guys who were doing the exoplanet research originally got laughed at. Now it's a respected science. Okay.
Yeah, right.
And so, that's what we're dealing with. Well, women still get ignored a great deal in the scientific community. Now, okay, take a semi-fringe scientific community like UFOs, and the major flavor of people who are driving this thing are people who are interested in the technology. So you got a hardware driven organization. They want to find that UFO. They want to crawl in the cockpit and see what makes it tick and all that stuff. So any other kind of research that comes along, it's too squishy. People doing the consciousness research, it's too squishy for them. People doing research with the experiencers, it's too squishy. Linda and I come along and throw hard freaking numbers at everybody. It's too squishy. Even you can't. I had people come to me and say, you got to vet every one of those sightings. No, I don't. It was reported. I'm taking everybody at their word.
Well, it's funny that they say it's too squishy, but when you talk about consciousness, I think the more research that I've done, this has become one of the biggest parts of ufology.
Oh yeah,
because there's so much more to just nuts and bolts UFOs. I mean, I believe that they could be here at all times, just in a different dimension. It's so much deeper than we could ever understand, and there's so much, I believe, tied to our consciousness and the whole UFO phenomenon that you can't discount that. That's discounting a huge part of this.
Well, yeah. I'll tell you, I've been a fan since the late '90s of remote viewing. Okay. At the time, I lived in a Buddhist monastery. Okay, now let me qualify that. I worked every day at Lockheed Martin, but I lived in a Buddhist monastery, American Tibetan Buddhist monastery, Tibetan Orthodox. Okay, I had the buzz cut. I dressed like the Dalai Lama every day, and boy, I pushed the diversity policy at Lockheed Martin at headquarters to the bleeding edge, marching around there in a Buddhist outfit every day.
I can imagine.
Okay. And the funny thing was, there was a cute little joke. There was another woman. There was only about 105, 125 of us that were corporate security, all spread across the corporation. And there was another girl from my Sangha also worked at Lockheed within corporate security. So of this 105, 120 people that worked there, 2 of them were Buddhist nuns. Statistically, Buddhist nuns were taking over security at Lockheed Martin. It was kind of an inside joke there. But the deal with all that was, in '97, I worked I had a vocational side of my life, away from the technology of my day job, high pressure corporate day job. I've been in theater since I was 15. Community theater, professional amateur theater, professional dinner theater, that kind of thing. I also I dabbled in radio in DC area. I had been part of various talk shows, and it was that other 40-hour-a-week job, they say, your hobby. That's a lot. I did a show down there called The X Factor. But before I did The X Factor, I was visiting a friend of mine at one of the big talk radio stations, and I was sitting there listening to Dr. Brown, who is Courtney Brown, from the Farsight Institute, and he wrote some of the early books about remote viewing. Okay, as a professor, he wrote this stuff, and I was fascinated. So I got studied up on it. Okay. And I learned how to do it. I ended up going to a Farsight class and it cost me a small fortune, but I went and did that. And over the years, since around 2000, I have taught 5 different classes in it. Now, was it a one-day class? No, it was like a weekend class or a one-day class once a month or something like that. Okay. And so it's not like somebody came and did it for an afternoon. No, these people got together with me like one Sunday a month for a year, or twice a month for a year. And we got really good at it. Okay. And the cards are done blinded. Okay. And my spouse is, Linda is a professional research librarian. So she had some of her interns stuff the envelopes for us with targets. Now, some cards I gave them to make sure certain stuff I wanted in there, but they would stuff 100 envelopes for us. And then they'd have another intern sit there on a computer with a random number generator, writing the random numbers on the outside of the thing. Well, one thing that kept coming up, one of the target cards that was in there was, we didn't do one for Roswell, but we did one for one of our test target cards for the students it turned out to be the backside of the moon. Okay. And the remote viewers of all 5 of those classes over the past 20 years, every one of them that ever went to that alien base on the backside of the moon, they didn't know it was an alien base. None of us knew what that card was when we pulled it out of the basket of 100 cards. Okay. It was sealed in an envelope. And they pulled it out. We worked through the remote viewing protocols. And when everybody put their pen down, which is a remote viewing cue that the session has ended, they put their pens down, and 2 or 3 of the people looked up from the table at me and said, "Boy, whoever those folks were, they didn't like us there, and they told us to go away." And this has been a consistent thing. Okay, and I'm not the only remote viewing instructor that's had that kind of a card in the mix. There are plenty of other remote viewing groups have experienced this or gone. There's that alien, that one alien everybody sees on the internet there. Supposedly the KGB took pictures of them. They call him Alien Bob or something like that. Well, a bunch of different a bunch of remote viewer people reached back to see if he's real. He was conscious of people from our time reaching back into the 50s and touching him. He was conscious of it. He said, "Would you people leave me alone?" And I've heard this from other remote viewers, I'll give you another thing with the remote viewing and why this plays into this consciousness thing. Okay. We've had our consciousness people, they stopped the remote viewing programs, the Army program, supposedly in 1995 after 20 years of development. Oh, because everybody's screaming. There was all the Christian right screamed, "Oh my God, the government's doing witchcraft. We can't have that." Oh, and so the program appeared to go away. It simply went dark, much like Blue Book went away, and it simply went dark. Okay.
Right.
All right. So, one of the classes, we had some cards in there that tried to send people to the White House for a remote viewing trip, and we found out the place is warded. It's a magical term. It's got a psychic fence around it. Okay, and there was a couple of bases that we had heard stories about, not Dulce. We haven't tried Dulce, but we did these other bases and we couldn't go there. And I said, "Wow, these places are warded." And after we did one of those sites, I had black cars parked in front of my house for a month. So somebody knew we had done this. It was weird. So yeah, this consciousness thing is a big deal. It really is. I've had remote viewers that have reached out and touched some of these off-worlders. Okay. And it's a unique experience. It's not like sitting here talking to you. It's nonverbal. Think of it like having a conversation with a mime. It's different. Okay. And I have to make that clear to people that, if you run out and get into a remote viewing class, you're not going to plug into ETs and have a nice conversation over tea. It's not like that. But what I learned in the monastery was I learned that you could touch the same thing the remote viewers were touching. We call that this non-local consciousness. In the monastery, we call that the great consciousness. Okay, mind. Use a George Lucas term, the force. Okay, and it is possible to mine that material and download that material that's up there in the force. Okay, and between remote viewing and some of my training of 7 years in a monastery, I learned how to do that. And now, can I look it up like a book? No, I can't. But I've had situations where I was told to study a particular thing in my meditation, and I would come in and the Lama would sit down and start asking me questions about that topic matter, and I didn't think I knew anything about it, and then suddenly I knew all this stuff about it. It was in there, I just didn't know I knew it, and so that's how this contact with the great consciousness works. We all have the spark in us of the life force. So all of us are capable of doing this. And, somebody asked me someday back on one of these radio shows, they said, so Cheryl, what do you think is going to be the big deal with ET? When are we going to get disclosure, or when are we going to have ET land in the front lawn of the White House? You know what my opinion is on that, Chris? My opinion is we're going to have enough people on this planet hit this consciousness thing, and
Right.
then bang, and we're going to have it's going to hit like a psychic critical mass and maybe wake up the rest of the culture, so to speak. And when we can stop looking at ourselves and thinking we're separate from everything else in the universe and be able to open our hearts and our minds, and ET is going to say, yeah, we were here all along. Hi. Because they have told experiencers, we have been with you for 40 or 50,000 years, and you just don't see us.
I want to go back to something you said. You said that some of the underground bases, or some of these bases, were warded by some sort of magic. And it brings me to one of the things that I wanted to talk about is how all of this is also connected to sort of the world of magic and spirits and the paranormal, such as like when you look at Bigfoot sightings
Okay.
or fairies or things like this.
Let's go there. Ghosts. Okay, let's go there.
Yeah, it all seems to have some connection on some level.
Okay, let me give you an example. I have a unique situation. I've said this on a few other shows, so I came out of the closet about this quite some time ago. In my family, clairvoyance ran down my mother's side of the family, and North African Berber shamanism ran down the other side of my father's side of the family. So the three Costa kids got kind of a double whammy of this stuff. Okay. My brother hid from it and my sister hid from it, but I went ahead and embraced it. Okay. And the only place I was able to find understanding was within the psychic and on the edges of that, the early witchcraft community. This is back in the 70s, early 70s. And yeah, I'm a card carrying witch, but it's not what you think it is. I don't worship the devil. We don't sacrifice little animals. It's a life affirming faith. And but if you studied it as long as I have, everything's connected. And you also know that things like, well, I'll tell you who else knows this stuff. The guys that wrote that big book, that big doorstop book for the Free Foundation, Dr. Reagan Mitchell Foundation here, Ray Hernandez and that group.
Yeah.
They'll tell you all this paranormal stuff. We need to stop stovepiping it. The paranormal people at some conventions won't talk to UFO people, and the UFO people won't talk to paranormals. and that's a darn shame. Now, I went to the Michigan conference, Contact Michigan, and there everything was very nicely mixed. You could walk through the vendor suite, and it was a mix of UFO and a mix of paranormal, and the talks were like that as well. But there's a lot of people who want to stovepipe this as they're all individual phenomena, and what the problem is because this is all consciousness related. It's all one topic matter, and if we're ever going to do some serious research on this, these communities, the Bigfoot community, the ghost community, the general paranormal community, the UFO community, have got to get together, establish some standards, and start sharing information.
Yes, I agree 100%. There's so much more going on than we could understand. And, even going back to ancient text and then the Bible, I think a lot of what was understood to be angels and demons are the same thing as these interdimensional beings that we interact with now. It could be some of the same beings, some of the ancient gods we see in Egyptian and Sumerian. Also could be some of these same beings and entities that are not necessarily green men from different planets, but just different dimensional planes.
I would agree with you 100%. Especially in my deep esoteric Tibetan Buddhist studies, there's what the Buddhism that everybody sees out on the street, and then in any of these kinds of things, there's an inner circle, and then there's an even inner secret circle. Okay, and I've walked in those inner circles as a mystic. Okay, and I've learned a tremendous amount, and I'll tell you a little quick story. We had our senior Lama was here from India, and he had done this big teaching to 500 people in the temple type of thing. And when he did it, he got done, and he went over to he left the temple and went into the cottage. And of course, all the congregation left. And as soon as they were all gone, after about an hour, he came back out and played a little bit of basketball with the young monks. And we were setting up he loved to do hot dog and weenie hamburger roast kind of things, right? And there was like 30 of us out there from the temple. And we were out there having a talk with him. And one girl asked him, one of our nuns asked him, he says, well, we Buddhists believe that your universe is teeming with life. Are there like other beings like living on the moon? And this is before I'd ever done remote viewing on the thing, right? And he smiled at her a minute, and he looked across all 30 of us who were sitting there eating our hot dogs and hamburgers. He looks over to me and this other novice nun. Two of us were novices, and we were probably the two flunkiest novices they'd ever had, honest to goodness, And he looks at us and he said, you two have been touched by the sky dancers. And I'm sitting there saying, oh no, I'm already in enough crap with these people as it is, And so he says, how many species are on the moon? He says to us. I looked at Vicky. We're both sitting there like blushing because we didn't really like being outed like that. But I looked at her and I says, we got to answer him. And she says, yeah. And she looked back and says, any particular season? And he said, no. We looked at each other. 5, and there's your answer, 5, Now, how do we know that? Okay. We're both experiencers. Okay. That's how we knew that. Okay. And so it's just, that's the kind of goofy stuff. Now, if you've ever read the Free Report, they interviewed like 4,400, 4,500 people. And ET keeps telling all these experiencers, take care of your planet and wake up. Now, what do they mean by wake up? Wake up to the bigger consciousness. But we've had this since a very, very long time in our culture, not just since the 14th, 15th century, but we've had a suppression of the mystical arts in our overall culture for a long time, particularly in Western culture. there's like 60 major traditions of what we would call craft or witchcraft or magical mysticism on the planet, maybe another 120 variations. And if you look at the individual practitioners, there's probably a million different traditions. Okay. That's what people don't understand. There's lots of us around. I think we're about 1 in 10 or 1 in 6 in Americans, personally, from some of the data. I've done some of my own statistic work and applied it to the craft community. There's a lot of people that are really, really awake or trying to become awake in the mystical arts. And part of that is quieting your mind and learning how to touch the great consciousness. And that's the secret to touching the ETs. But I've had the hardware crowd come back to me, oh, no, but we have to verify it with a radio type of thing, So, we've got a long ways to go.
Now, as far as your personal contact experience, could you maybe tell us about your one of these experiences? What type of beings you're communicating with, and
No.
Okay, and why is that?
Let us say it is so far from a reality that you would understand that it would not make any sense. And let me give you a reference. You've had you woke up one morning, you had a really, really great dream. You try to explain it to your family over breakfast, and the words come out wrong because you don't have the vocabulary to explain it. Okay. It made sense while you're there in the dream, but you can't explain it to anybody. And I can't explain it in English. Okay. Now, I have sat down with certain very smart Buddhist and for that matter, Native American mystics. And we've had this kind of a conversation. Oh, you've met that crowd too, huh? And because you give them a cue and you say, I had this experience with that, and they'll say, oh yeah, did they show you this? But I don't have the words to tell you. Now, some people have been able to tell you this. That lady down in New Zealand, Susan, I can't remember her last name. She's been blessed with being able to share with you her experiences. Okay. But most people have some kind of screen memory or block or something like this. I don't have conscious access to my experiences, except sometimes I'm sitting here talking with somebody who is in the know about this stuff, and something will get said that will trigger a response from me where I'll make a response. And I know other people like this. We didn't really know what our extent of our contact was until someone said something and say, oh yeah, did they show you how to do thus and such, that kind of thing. But it's like a case of amnesia. Okay. Or if I do remember, I don't have the words to tell you. Sometimes I draw the stuff, but that's about it,
Is it a situation like you're taken in your sleep? Is it a astral communication type thing?
Yes and no. It's the only way I can explain it. Yes and no. I know people who are touched about once a month. Okay. We've had conversations about it. Okay. There are some people who are quite literally being studied on a long-term basis. I know my own blood family on my mother's side. We've been touched for we can document four generations of touching, maybe as much as 5. Okay. I had a cousin that was in a fire tower back in the early 70s, and something came down, shined a bright light on him and the other kid. It burned out the radio they had. And when the fire people came, the members of their fire department came up and got them. I wrote an article about this, came up and got them and took them to the hospital. The doctors thought they were on drugs because their blood pressure was through the roof. They checked them out. There was no tox. Okay, 12, 14 hours later, they both woke up and they were both sunburned on one side of their body. Face and arms, the part that was exposed to the brightness. And neither one of them will talk about it. Now, one passed away about 8 or 9 years ago, and that particular cousin of mine won't talk to me. Especially, I went to him and tried to get him to give me an off the record interview for my column, and he wouldn't talk to me. I had to get the interview and the whole story from an aunt, you know, and he's got some incredibly bad health problems, and they were similar to what the other kid had. Okay, and so, this whole thing with experiencers, the fact that we're not treated well, it's we don't treat our veterans very well either, do we? How many veterans came back from the original Gulf War and they told them, oh no, you're imagining these things. And they found out by studying these people, they found out that they had been exposed to one of Saddam Hussein's low-level chemical attacks. Okay. Right. So we're lied to, and we're lied to. Okay. So, that's why American mystics keep it pretty much to themselves, because you've got a 70% Christian culture here in the United States that thinks we're in league with the devil. We're not. We're just studying a different kind of physics. And I tell my students these days, so what we're going to talk about right now is magical physics. Okay. Leave the gods and goddesses out of this thing. We're going to talk about if somebody said, well, do you do spells? Okay, fine. If I'm doing something, a working that you might consider like a spell, okay, in craft, we would, people would invoke gods, goddesses, or if you're a little bit more on the Buddhist side, bodhisattvas and that kind of thing, right? Shamans will invoke spirits to help them do their magic and things like this. But some of us have gotten to a level of our practice where it's just another form of physics. And why do we want to do a prayer meeting before we do our physics experiment? Okay. And that's the mindset. There is a physics level of this. If you strip away all of the trappings and all of the what I'm going to call the mystical rhetoric, it's really a very advanced form of physics, and it's plugged into this whole consciousness model.
Yes, and it is getting very interesting, especially the more that our science advances and technology and the advent of, quantum computing, the studies that are coming out that we could actually possibly live in some sort of strange simulation. But that's a whole nother show. For the last few minutes that we have tonight, I'd like to get your thoughts on our secret space program.
No, really.
If we have one, how far does it go?
Okay. All right. First thing, we have had a secret space program since we've been putting rockets up in the 50s. Okay. Now the speakers, everything had a cover story. It looked like a nice scientific experiment, but maybe there was a camera on there that was taking pictures as the thing rotated, went over, orbited the Earth and things like this. And then an airplane would catch the thing in a net when it was falling back through the atmosphere. We've had that kind of stuff going on for years. Okay. Now, do we have it to the proportions that people at some of these conferences are talking about, where they've built huge ships and things like this? Okay, look, we kept the A-bomb pretty secret. Okay. Yes, it's possible to do that. And I worked in a classified environment. It's possible to have stuff going on that the general public has no idea that it's out there. But I've heard people talking about, we've got these massive starships up there and all this stuff. And I say, who?
Oh, I've had people on that say they've actually been to Mars and have fought battles with aliens. So
yeah, I've read those things as well. And as a reporter, I never entertained it. Now, when they announced Space Force, that I was able to document. Space Force, okay, the Air Force has had its share of, they've had this burden for quite a while of dealing with all this stuff. Now, we've got a lot of commercial hardware up there in orbit, okay? The idea behind Space Force is somebody to take over that mission, kind of like the Navy did back in 1785. We've got to protect our merchant ships because they're Barbary pirates or Mediterranean pirates are taking our people and taking the goods and holding them for ransom. That's why the Navy was formed. And the Space Force is a similar effort, letting the Air Force do aeronautical stuff, and the Space Force dealing strictly with the outside the atmosphere, non-aeronautical stuff, and that makes complete sense. A terrorist with a Korean missile with a nuclear warhead properly placed could take out a bank of major satellites with an EMP burst that would literally put our country into the 1960s in about 20 minutes. Okay, because think about it, most of our phone calls go through satellites anymore. All of our internet goes through satellites anymore. Our cell phones, the trunks to get them to the local cell towers and things like that, that's all coming from satellites. Okay, so a couple of well-placed nuke warheads just far enough out there to get the EMP to hit those satellites, we could find ourselves in the 1960s very quickly.
Right.
Technology and communication wise. So yeah, we need something like Space Force to deal with this, also deal with all the junk that's up there and things like that. And also remember, the Russians have hunter killer satellites, and the Chinese have hunter killer satellites as well. I don't doubt that we probably do as well.
Now, going back to UFO sightings for a second, what percentage do you think is actually us, military craft, being mistaken for alien craft?
Okay. I have people ask me it all the time. Okay, when I first started writing my column, people told me 20%, and I had people tell me 10%, different depending upon what investigators you talk to. And when my book came out, I don't want to call them trolls, but I had people getting in my face, oh, it can't be more than 5%. Okay, fine. I took 5%. I said 5%. Okay, fine. Let me crank that back against that 42 million people. Okay. And in fact, I got a calculator right now. I'm going to give you 42 million people. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 times 0.05. And that is about 2.1 million sightings are real. Not sighting reports, it's sightings. Remember, based on that 16% of Americans say they've seen a UFO. Okay, so the number, we have a little saying in statistics: lies, damn lies, and statistics. But I've cranked these numbers a number of different ways. In fact, I worked on it for months, trying it wasn't every day, but it was every time I saw a statistic or a metric from a poll or something like that come across my desk. I started playing with it to see what kind. I sit there and just play with a calculator and start seeing because I never believed that 1 in 10 thing that they were saying in the UFO community when I was first going to conventions in like 2013, 2012 timeframe. I didn't believe it. I said, no. That number can't be right. It's either got to be bigger or it's got to be smaller. And it turns out it's actually smaller. It's 1 in 6 people have seen a UFO. Okay. It's better than the 1 in 10 they were putting out. Okay. Now, how many people report them? Okay. 1 in 277, and that varies from state to state based on population and sightings that are actually reported, but it averages out to 1 in 277.
Very interesting. Now, final question for tonight. With everything happening with disclosure, you had mentioned that it seems like we're now taking a step back. It is also coinciding with, I think, a lot of people awakening, a lot of people opening their minds to things. I've heard people that I've never thought I'd heard before, accepting the fact that UFOs exist. So do you think that maybe within our lifetime that we will see open contact again with these beings, and in full disclosure to where it's just
in my lifetime I'm 67 years old. My lifetime, probably not. In your lifetime, you're much younger than I am, very probably. But let me explain something. If we why they're backpedaling, it's based on what I interviewed Lou Elizondo 3 times. Okay. And one of the things that kept coming up, and even a former Senator oh God, now I can't remember the guy who helped launch this thing. I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head. It's late, but Senator Reid, he said there were people in the Pentagon who were trying to keep down this whole UFO thing because they're very, very religious and they don't want us making contact with aliens because they're demons. That's the view. Now,
Right.
think about what our political situation has become during the Trump administration. Okay. We're bordering on becoming a theocracy. Okay. We are bordering on becoming a theocracy. Had Hillary gotten in there, we probably would have we would have had disclosure. But no, this guy wasn't interested in that. And the people who are what I'm going to say, the theocracy type people in the Pentagon are emboldened. And they're trying to shut this whole thing down, keep everybody stupid on the topic matter. We don't want demons. We don't want to touch ET. ET's a demon. Okay. And that's the mentality. I wrote several articles about this in the last year that I wrote my column. I wrote several articles about this, and they were very, very significantly read articles. In fact, I'll give you a flavor. It was I wrote an article called "Are ETs demons or angels?" Okay. And they had the picture the editors put up had this kind of a really trolly looking, teeth like a vampire kind of thing. And we used to get a certain amount of page views in the first 5 days that were, I had a pretty solid audience, both nationally and internationally. Okay. By 2016, I had a huge newspaper audience. And when we did this article, our numbers were like 10 times what we normally have. It was amazing. I got a call up the next morning from my editor and said, "My God, you're 5 times more than you usually pull." And I had huge page view numbers for the newspaper. And then they called me back another couple in the next week. After a weekend, they called me up and said, "My God, it's like 10 times bigger," and it just went bigger and bigger and bigger. And in fact, I just had Dr. Burke copied the link to my article, and he wrote some kind of little thing. He went out there on Facebook and plastered it all over the UFO groups. So this article got another renewed life about a week ago. So people are very interested in this topic matter, and there's some real sensitivity to the idea that ET might be demons. But think of it this way: people, I hear a lot of people have written me during the time 7 years of my column and said, "Oh, are they going to invade us? Are they going to eat us?" Look, they could have flattened us a long time ago. Think about it. April 1561, Nuremberg, Germany. The residents came out of their huts and saw a Star Wars kind of battle going on over the city. 5 years later, it happens again in Basel, Switzerland, 2 different weeks in the summer of 1556. Okay, they could have flattened us a long time ago, but somebody's looking out for us. Somebody's protecting us. Okay, I don't know. You want to call it the Galactic Federation? I don't care. Somebody is protecting us. And a number of experiencers have said that the ETs refer to us as the planet of the children. Well, okay, why are we children? We're children because we haven't become enlightened in this cosmic consciousness context.
We do have we have a lot of growing up to do before I think that everyone can fully accept, this phenomenon as it is. And Cheryl, thank you so much for coming on tonight. That was fascinating. And
my pleasure. Anytime, my friend. Anytime.
All right. Well, you have an excellent night.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.